guys are good with all the fires and everything?
It actually helps the real estate market, just so you know.
I seen some like the devastation that happened after the fact, man. I think there was like 50 to 60 homes that burned down.
Wow.
Structures in LA, 10,000, bro. A lot of real estate is supply and demand. Right now, we have 10,000 displaced people that had a home that no longer have a home. A lot of insurance policies in LA were canceled like within the last 3 months. A decent amount of the people in Pacific Palisades had no proper insurance. As these people start to find other types of housing, it's like, imagine adding, let's say you have a demand of $2,000 homes per year. Imagine adding a demand of 10,000 homes per year. So now what ends up happening with the rental market, it starts to little by little start to dry out. Then what happens with the purchase inventory is little by little, it starts to dry out as well too. Now, what I believe is that it's actually going to trickle down to Ventura County as well too. So our county is neighbors to LA County. What I believe is going to happen is that for some of these people that were homeowners in some of these areas, is that if they go into other parts of LA, they're not going to be able to find what they want at the price that they want. We're neighbors. So our market is actually in between LA and Santa Barbara, and our market is a substantially lower price than LA to Santa Barbara. Meaning like you want to get some of the homes that burned down that were $20 million on the ocean, in our market, you can get that for $5 million. It's almost like a little bit like Miami and Fort Lauderdale.
Sure.
I imagine that properties in Miami are higher price in Fort Lauderdale, but you can still, so you get a lot more bang for your buck. So I believe that, not only do I believe, but I've seen it happen, because this is like the third or fourth fire that we've kind of experienced. And I've seen what happens to the inventory after that. And the inventory starts to contract. Some of the people are in a financial position to be able to do it like immediately because they got the financial resources to do it. So you're going to see it a little bit at the beginning. But when it's really going to start to play an effect is when the insurance money starts to come in.
And then when the insurance money starts to come in, now people have options and choices. And what you're saying is because you've seen it a couple times where that'll cause people, and they're not all collectively talking to each other, but it'll just cause people naturally to come to the same conclusion, which is like, hey, if we're going to stay in this geographic area, if we just go to like Ventura County or Camarillo or whatever, we're still here, and it's significantly less money as compared to where we were 100%. Before.
Yeah, well, I think that the other options that they're going to be looking at is other areas like Santa Barbara. They're going to be looking at maybe like Manhattan Beach, but there's not a lot of inventory in those areas, and it's similar price. And we're like almost like we're in the middle of LA and Santa Barbara. Part of the reason why it's going to help out the rental market and the purchase market, and a lot of people don't realize this, when their property burns down, they actually don't know how complex the building process is in California. And I think this is where Newsom's going to get some major heat, bro, from now the most recent fire. I've had conversations with people like, oh yeah, I'm just going to rebuild in the next year.
And you're like,
contract.
Nope, it's not going to happen.
They're in for a rude awakening.
So like you're saying, like, yeah, it'll help with demand. The problem is we still have restricted supply. So all that really means is that like the average home in Ventura or in Camarillo is going to be like $1 million. Like that's what's going to happen.
There's additional problems with this too, man. Like, and I haven't dug fully into it, but they're talking about like how a lot of insurance policies in LA were canceled like within the last 3 months. Yeah. And a decent amount of the people in Pacific Palisades had no proper insurance.
Like a lot. Something like one of the major insurers there, it was like 70% of the people that they dropped were in the Pacific Palisades, like specifically.
So imagine that you get dropped by your insurance company. Maybe your house is paid off. You're like, oh yeah, I got time to basically like re-up it. Like holidays are here. I'm just going to do it at the beginning of the year. Fire starts. And during a fire, nobody insures during a fire in that geographic area. So you can, like, if a fire breaks out, you can't call an insurance company and be like, hey, I want to get insurance. No.
Well, in Miami, in certain areas, like they won't give you insurance. And you have to ask yourself, like, These are,
Why is that?
yeah, why is that? Like, you know, your question, like how you always ask yourself, you're like, is this true? It's like, well, how are they coming to that conclusion? And if they're like these major corporations that have they have a mandate, you know, to make a profit, so they got to be mitigating risk properly, and they're coming to this conclusion. And systematically, whether it be on coastlines or in California or in areas that are prone to having these types of natural disasters happen, they're just basically saying, like, look, like it's not worth the risk. You know, I think it's interesting because I took a trip last year and I booked it before this hurricane came through. And you know, it's funny. I talked to Angel. He's like, because he's thinking about like, where would I be geographically? And I'm like, what about Florida, bro? It'd be dope. We could hang out, play pickleball, and then we'll get Jose over. And he was like, I don't know. You guys have like all these hurricanes. And I was like, bro, you guys have fires like all the time. Like, what are you talking about? Right.
And earthquakes.
Yeah. And earthquakes and like all this stuff. And he's like, well, don't you get like hurricane damage every year? I'm like, no, you know, just like you guys don't get hit by fires every year, specifically to you, but they do happen regularly. But anyway, I took this trip and I booked it in advance before this big storm came and hit the west coast of Florida. And the Airbnb wouldn't let me like cancel it. So they were like, you got to come. So I waited, you know, postponed it until they could get it ready and operational and everything. And then I went, but I told Carla, like, while we were there, it's like, I feel like I shouldn't be here because there were like piles of wreckage. And in fact, I bumped into a guy who was like, his thing was right on the ocean. And, you know, just as a reflex, I just asked him, because that's like a kind thing to do. You're like, hey, how you doing? And he was like, well, do you see what's going on here? I was like, hey man, is it okay if I give you a hug? Because he started crying. I gave him a hug, and then he started talking to me, you know, and he owned it for like 25 years or whatever. And his parents like lived on the island, and, you know, his kids had come, and it really served him well. And I'm sure he made a lot of money over time. So I just helped, you know, kind of lent this perspective. And I'm not suggesting this is true in California, but like, I'm just sharing my experience with this individual. I was like, well, you know, it served you really well. But as I'm walking up and down the beach there, all of these beautiful homes that are on the sand are just like blown out. You know what I'm saying? Like everything's blown in, furniture's all like strewed around. There's big piles of debris. And I said to Carla, like, you know, it's interesting because what's happening is in those areas, you know, as humans, like, I think we like what we like. And, you know, we also don't like to be kind of told what to do, sort of thing. And I told her, like, what I think what we're experiencing is like this, it's a different form of gentrification, where now in Florida, in those areas, the only people that, like, the mom and pops, they're not going to, they can't do it anymore because the cost of insurance is too high and like all that other stuff. And in the future, Jose, all of those homes are going to need to be on stilts that are probably 14, 15 feet off the ground for storm surge. But only a very infinitesimally small portion of the population can afford to buy the home that's destroyed, tear it down, build it up on stilts. You know what I'm saying? So it's either corporations or really like uber wealthy individuals, like 0.01%, that'll even be able to live in those geographic areas anymore.
Not only that, but like with condo associations, because I own a building in a condo association, and they wanted me to be part of the board and potentially even president, but I couldn't stand the politics.
I know, it's terrible.
I could not.
It's horrible, dude. It's the worst.
Not only that, but the people that were making the decisions, a lot of them aren't very financial savvy. So like they wanted to spend $15,000 on a palm tree because they had extra money in the account. And I sat there and I'm like, guys, just because we have money in the account, that doesn't mean that you got to spend $15,000 on a palm tree. Yep. I'm like, what you need to do is, instead of spending $15,000 on a palm tree, is this will help us when an issue comes up, because over time, something will come up. There will be an issue, I guarantee you. And because you're not preparing and you're mismanaging the funds, when that issue comes up, the only options that you're going to have is some sort of special assessment, which is going to increase the dues, which is going to affect the prices for the neighborhood. Yep. The lower the HOA fees, the more a buyer can afford to buy in that community. The higher the HOA fees, the lower. Now, And this is something that people need to consider whenever buying condos or townhomes or things that are managed through an HOA. You have to be very selective of which HOAs you get into, because if you get into the wrong HOAs, your investment can be hurt tremendously.
Yeah, agreed, 100%.
By mismanagement of people that don't really have financial
and it's not
literacy in some cases.
It's not a paid position, and they're managing a gigantic budget. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like $500,000, $1 million budget, and like nobody has any business background or financial background. And how they end up making decisions is emotionally, not practically or logically. So I do think it's interesting. It does have effects on our kind of, the business of selling real estate in terms of affordability.
Yeah.
In terms of getting financing. Because 93% of the population gets a mortgage, so they have to have insurance on their property. The question is like, for agents that are in areas, whether it's in California or in other areas that are experiencing similar things, like what are some intentional and purposeful things that you can do to continue to serve, the community? I think it's funny. One of Angel's guys, he's coming to the summit that we're doing. I talked to him yesterday on a live stream, and we were talking about media, because I did a thing for EXP University where they asked me to teach about media, and I live streamed it on Instagram. So he was there kind of watching, and then I pulled him in, and he's like, "Yeah, bro, like, what I'm doing is like I talk about myself and like how I serve the community and blah, blah, blah." I'm like, "Hey, do you notice who you're talking about?" He was like, "What?" I'm like, "You're talking about you. Let me ask you a question," because they're in LA. "Do you have any clients or anybody that could have been affected by like this situation?" He's like, "Oh yeah." I'm like, "All right, well, what do those people want to know about?" They want to know about programs. They want to know about what's available to them. They want to know about other options. Maybe for those who have resources, like here is inventory that's available right now. If they were in this community, what would be similar to that community in Oxnard or in Camarillo or in Simi Valley? You know what I mean? Like, so really getting clear on what they would be interested in and then provide it to them, and do that via a platform that allows you to be able to scale that, where as many people as possible can watch it, with the goal and objective of being helpful to them in some way. You're thinking in your mind like, 16K, well, like you already have 2 people that are like, "Yeah, I want to do it." I've only brought 53. That turned into almost 400 because it's a good opportunity. In order to attract A+ talent, you need an A+ opportunity. The reason why I chose this, it's proven, it's at scale, and it's profitable. We're the Uber of what we're doing. Everybody else is fighting to be Lyft.